I'm going to hand it off to Jessie, co-founder of Green the Bid.
Thank you so much. We're just going to pull up our presentation deck now, and then we'll get started. I'm Jessie Nagel. I am one of the co-founders of Green the Bid and really excited to be with all of you today, here with all of you today. And thank you so much to the AMA for having us for this presentation. I'll let everybody quickly introduce themselves when they pop on the screen. So let's begin. I'd like to start by giving a little bit of background about Green the Bid and, why are we here? And I think most of you can probably understand and appreciate why we're here, because you've lived it, which is that each year we, as a global production industry, and especially including in advertising, produce lots of waste, thousands of tons of carbon, along with thousands of tons of waste. And I think for many of us, this is untenable. We don't want to work this way anymore. And we could see an opportunity to transition our industry as a whole. And so that is why Green the Bid came together, because we know that we have the ability and the resources and the growing will to make this happen. And so who are we? What are we here for? We're here to make this actualized. And we are a nonprofit organization and an educational resource so that we can work together as stakeholders, all of us collectively and pre-competitively, to make sure that this transition can happen, because it is an urgent call, as we all know. So what does that look like from a pragmatic standpoint when I speak about all these stakeholders? What we found before in conversations with people when we first started was that there were a lot of people that were working in the space that really wanted to make change, but they found it difficult to actualize it in absence of others' participation. So we knew that it was really vital that when people pledged to become part of this movement, and specifically Green the Bid, that they recognize what I like to call their superpowers, or what they have agency over, as the kind of catalyst for change. So you can see from this ecosystem, it kind of describes how this works with this, green line going through as a connecting point of the bid. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But when brands join, they are pledging to participate by supporting sustainability with a budget. Something that can be seen as its own department, so that we can make sure that things happen properly and well. And agencies, when they're involved with, if it's direct to brand, then the brand will connect with their production partners. But if there's an agency involved, then the agencies are really advocating to the brand and client as to why it's important to support this, as any department would be supported with the budget. And also, looking to advocate and speak to production about what that looks like and what the expectations are, supported with a budget. And then production, as many of you are involved with, is on the ground making that happen. So we have lots and lots of resources, and we do things like this all the time, where we do webinars to talk to people, to learn about their experiences, and also to constantly iterate on the material that we're creating to help production know all of the different facets and things that can be done on set. And then when there is a budget to support it, then there's reporting that comes back. We can talk a little bit about that later. And then all the crew and vendors really have their own areas, the departments that they're taking care of, as they're taking care of other things, and in collaboration, either with a consultant or with the production kind of steward, are really looking at how they can update their processes to be more sustainably minded. And we have, again, lots of checklists and things. And then post-production companies are really looking at both their studios, but also the carbon footprint of digital storage. And we're working very earnestly in that area to develop best practices and understanding. And then everybody is responsible for zero waste, minimal carbon, sustainable, and hopefully regenerative practices. And, things that can be included in that could be shifting to a green office energy plan. It can make a huge difference. So basically, we know that people, are able to best enact these practices when there's a framework in place. And so that's what we're here to talk about today. Now I'm going to kick it over to Michael, who's going to talk about what does it mean to have a sustainable and regenerative production, and some of those key terms.
Yes. Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining. So we hear, there's just some terms that we hear a lot, and it's important to understand those terms and what they refer to. I'm sure Hannah's going to do a deep dive on these things, but when you hear the word sustainability, which is the most common word when you think about it, just means not to do any additional damage, or to do less bad. And while sometimes that's the best you can do in certain aspects of production, what we want to look for is the opportunities to be regenerative, which is next slide, which is leaving an environment or community better than when you got there through your production and through your activities. And so that's what we look for. Opportunities like that might look like donating food to local food banks, doing an e-waste drive where the crew brings in their e-waste and the sustainability team handles that. Doing a clothing swap, things like that are regenerative. Donating, set pieces to local schools and theater companies. And then zero waste, we'll hear that, and minimal carbon. And that's a whole nother conversation why we're not talking about carbon neutral, because it's not really attainable. But you can minimize your carbon and you can minimize your waste. And in terms of waste, reducing your waste as much as possible, and then with what's left, diverting 90% or better from landfill is the goal. Now, that's not just a low-hanging fruit goal. That's a tough goal to get, but it's achievable if everyone's on the same page. So that means composting, recycling, food donations, art department donation, all of that contributes to diversion from landfill. And of course, there's going to be a few scraps that go to landfill. Same thing with carbon. So you want to reduce the flights, electrify the fleet, use electric generators, solar generators, as much as you possibly can. And then with what carbon is left, you can claim the accountability for that carbon by investing in certain organizations that have been vetted that are doing good to mitigate the damage from carbon. So that is it for me. Kat is going to talk to you about what we're doing to set up productions for success. Take it away, Kat.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that. Hello, everyone. So what are we doing to set up production for success? So we as an organization and a lot of our members and supporters, we're advocating to the brands, agencies, and networks for the funds to make sustainability happen. And those funds are specific to making sure there's an actual team on the ground, whether it's a consultant or a team on the ground dedicated to managing the sustainability, and then also dedicated to making sure that reporting gets done at the end of the job. So it's a dedicated team measuring and then reporting. And we're educating the brand, agency, and production side producers on how to estimate for it in their overall budgets, giving them the tools they need to be able to estimate for it properly and review it properly in the budgets. And then we're also educating producers, production company side, agency side, brand side, on how to speak to service, production, and post partners about it. So really educating and making sure the resources are in place in order to set production as a whole, agency, brand, and production company side up for success. And then what is the role of the producer? Besides looking through this weird lens, the back of the camera here in this photo, the role of the producer, again, whether you're agency, brand, or production company side, is education. So your role is to educate people on why we need this, what's needed, and how we're going to achieve it. Leadership in that space as well, because ultimately, if you're a producer on the ground, again, agency, brand, or production company side, you're responsible, and you're really leading the team on how to make this happen. And then everything you can do to make sure that it's implemented properly. Again, from making sure the budget is laid out properly, making sure all the partners understand what their responsibilities are, and then seeing it through to the end with the follow through on making sure you're talking about it with the crew and cast and all of your partners. So education, leadership, and implementation. And then how to bid for a sustainable shoot. Another thing we talk through to our partners and agencies and brands is there's two ways to do it, really. Using a sustainability consultant. And we have multiple different sustainability consultants vetted globally on our website, or you can do it yourself. And if you do it yourself, it's key to make sure that all the department heads are involved, that you have the right production supplies, and your trucking, generators, and fuels are also really considered. And again, both of these versions still mean that you have a dedicated team on the ground. depending on the size of the production. It's a smaller team, obviously, if you're doing it yourself or even with a sustainability consultant, but a dedicated team to manage at whatever level needs to be managed for the sustainability. And then where it should show up on your production bids, if it's an AICP job, there's actually a line item that the AICP has. I believe it's line 134, but it should show up on your production bids in that line item. Again, non-union, I think the bids will look similar. So just make sure that there's a line item. If you ask your partner, make sure there's a line item for that, and that it meets the qualifications that you have around the cost that you know that it should take to get that sustainability done. And then what should a sustainable shoot look like? This is our friend Hannah. So I'm going to pass off to our friend Hannah, who's going to take you through what it should actually look like on the ground.
Thank you, Kat. And for anyone that is not already a huge fan of Green the Bid, I could not sing their praises enough. So after this webinar, take a look at their website. We've been using their resources for a really long time. I'm honored to be included here to talk more specifically a focus of adapting these practices into the non-union video and photo world. And so we're going to talk about everything from pre-production through production and then after wrap. So looking where it should show up on production bids. So pre-production planning, as Kat said, you could obviously hire a consultant. What we have found in the last I think 6 years that we've really been making an effort for sustainability is that we bring it into our own umbrella in-house. And so we don't have dedicated sustainability staff for line items. Rather, all of our production teams are cross-trained. And so in our pre-production planning, we want to make sure that we're accounting for the people and the process to have sustainability. So if we go to the next slide, in production, so it looks like not one stop towards zero waste at all the time, right? So I know that when I was first starting doing sustainability, it felt a little bit overwhelming that there was so much work to do. And so one step better every shoot is the right direction. And so knowing that you don't need to do zero waste or nothing at all. And so in pre-production, you want to make sure that there's no surprise, that it is part of that bid to wrap. And so if you have any questions specifically, you can drop those in the chat, and I know we'll have some Q&A towards the end. But in production, this photo is actually from the first shoot that we ever had composting on set, and it was a 2-week shoot, and that black trash bag is all the landfill that we had from 2 weeks because of the difference that composting made. And then of course, still composting is not the one size fits all to fix it. So we would still try to rehome the food, either putting it into taking it for donations to shelters, same thing with wardrobe, props, set pieces. Our mentality is that you want to rehome something before you look to recycle or compost it. And I believe that Green the Bid says the same. So we can go on to the next slide. So this is another thing in production is hydration and reducing the single-use plastic. This was actually the first thing that we did. And I think for everyone here, if you're overwhelmed or you don't know where to start, this is the easiest thing to do, because you can get these beautiful reusable containers. And there are a couple of ways that you can make this a water station. You either can buy the upright water stations, or you can rent them if you're traveling, and they will disperse hot and cold water. But we actually also have a rechargeable water pump that we can travel with. So even when we're on location that maybe doesn't have electricity, or we don't have the option to rent locally a full water stand, you can still use this same refillable jug and get rid of all of your plastic water bottles. If there's a situation where maybe you're doing a tech scout, or it's just a small one-day shoot and you're afraid that you won't use all of this water, then you would want to look into something like canned water as opposed to plastic water bottles. And so just getting creative and knowing those resources ahead of time. Another way in reducing waste is no printing. We now have a line in our production bids and descriptions where we say by default, we don't print everything. We can give everybody a digital copy. If somebody really feels the need to print something, we will print one for the team and like put it up on a wall. And so being an advocate for production to set the standard so that the agency, the brand, the clients then have something to say yes to, rather than they need to create the way to be more sustainable. I know e-waste, Michael talked a little bit about doing e-waste drives. This again is another regenerative practice because you're giving an opportunity for clients, for crew, for the agency to bring items from home in and do an e-waste collection and making sure that those are recycled in the appropriate manner. Next slide. Food donations. This is a great company called Everyday Action out in LA. But for those that are not shooting in LA, or if you're shooting in a small market that maybe wouldn't have an organization like this that will rehome the food, is it honestly, this to me starts in pre-production, because you have a PA or coordinator or yourself that takes the time to research what organizations will take food that is opened or not opened. There's obviously like health and safety guidelines you need to maintain, but in Chicago we have something called Love Fridge, and there are fridges across the city that you can bring food to, and then people can just come and, you know, pull dinner for the evening out of there. And so there are easy ways that, again, composting is the last resort. You don't want to say, oh, well, we're just going to compost and that's great. It's a piece of the puzzle. And then next slide, we're for carbon reductions so in non-union shoots or smaller video and photo shoots, we don't have big teams that are maybe idling all day, but there's still ways that you can encourage carbon reduction. You can encourage crew to carpool. I have found that if production is the one that puts it out as something to consider, that people don't feel as weird to say, oh, well, do you want to carpool? Because, you know, in like the dating world, I'm the one that said, I like you first. So then you can say yes or no, and it's a little less uncomfortable. And it's really important, again, in pre-production, to make sure that you are getting the buy-in of the teams. And what I found is sometimes the department heads need some help to understand the how. The set dresser may want to be more sustainable and regenerative, but they're so focused on the creative that unless I come and have a conversation with them in pre-pro, they're not even thinking about that. And so I make sure that it's actually a phone call. I pick up the phone and I talk to the heads of the department and I say, what is your plan? Okay, if you don't have one, let's brainstorm. Let's talk about how we can rehome this. How, instead of buying a piece of furniture and then donating it, could we rent a floor model? Yeah, somebody's saying carpooling by department is most effective. Yes. Okay, next slide. So yeah, catering with COVID considerations. This is something that we saw a very real shift in 2020 and in through 21 and 22, where people were going to single serving meals, wrapping everything with plastic. All the crafty was single serve. And I would really encourage and challenge that we can move beyond that now. And so even the communication I put out to my crew when I'm booking them is, I say, I want everybody to know that we're not going to be doing single serve. And if someone has a concern, that gives them an opportunity to bring it to me. So I'm not negating the safety or concerns of health with anybody, but I'm just being more proactive and giving an opportunity for someone to say, if they're uncomfortable with that for any reason. And so reusable cutlery and plates would be the gold standard. If you can't do that, having something that's bamboo, knowing that those materials are compostable. And when you're having conversations with composting companies, there's really two ways to think about it. We actually like to always make sure that a catering company has not only composting in their practices, but that they're working with regenerative farm sourcing, meat sourcing, to even bring the meat to us, or and the food to us. You also having meat-free meals. Even saying like meat-free Mondays can make such a big difference. But if the catering company for any reason is not composting, then we make sure that we're not sending them back chafers that have food in it still, because we want to either rehome or compost that. And then another really easy thing is the actual chafers that catering comes in is making sure that those are reusable. The amount of aluminum that is wasted with disposable catering can keep me up at night, and it's such an easy change. So that's an example I know Kat talked about bidding earlier, where we don't call a line item out that says reusable chafers. For us, sustainability is the part of almost all of our line items. So our PAs are cross-trained in sustainability because we don't have 150 people on set where we need a department that's just focused on sustainability. So our PAs are also going to be the ones that are running donations, that are sorting composting, that are weighing composting. And so I got on a little bit of a tangent there, but that all came from cutlery and reusable plates with now that we're moving beyond some of the COVID restrictions. We can go to the next slide. And then with wrap, the one thing to think about here is if you are doing tracking for carbon tracking, you want to make sure that you're getting those measurements and some of those data points during production. And that's why in your pre-production, you have to be really diligent about knowing what your plan is, where your resources are, and how your what data points you need to gather. And it can be something that you could gather post-shoot, like who drove to set versus who flew to location. But some of the things you'll need to weigh out on set actually each day. And so you want to make sure that you have a plan for that before wrap, because you can't go back in time to get some of those data points. But it's, I would say, a very attainable process to even just focus on donating items after set. So often the items can get sent back to the client or the agency, and they may sit in a closet for a really long time and not be used. So one of our favorite things to do is to say, we could do that, or we could donate it to this really great shelter that is for women that are leaving abusive relationships and they just left everything at home. And so to them, having this really beautiful lamp can be a really powerful thing. And then the clients are getting excited about being part of it. We're still honoring, like if they do need to bring it back to the studio to keep for a future production, we give them that option. And then we say, or we could do this. And I like to be specific about the organization because again, it's about getting them excited, giving them a vision of the other life some of these prop and wardrobe could have. And with my set dressers or set builders, I always like to see where we can reuse pieces, even if it's on a completely different production. If another production can benefit from a wall that we can dismantle and reuse, like that's wonderful. I want to pass that on. And then of course, collecting data, images, receipts. I think it's been really powerful for our team to see the progress that we've made year over year to where we started with just plastic water bottles. And if I'm honest, I wouldn't have even said I was putting a stake in the ground and saying this is a big sustainability movement. It was that I was annoyed going around and picking up all these half-filled water bottles that nobody knew who they belonged to. And so I share that to encourage you that it can start small. It can start with one decision. It can say, I'm going to do this one thing. And again, the water stations, I think, is the most actionable that you could, like, if you're on set tomorrow, you could go make that happen. So then if you're generating that sustainability impact report, which I know what we've done and what Green the Bid's philosophy is that to share that report externally when they're paying for sustainability within the line item. So you want to make sure that there's that shared ownership for that reporting to be shared. And then sharing it with the brand, the agency, and then I think mostly on this call are fellow production companies. So having that for your own records as well. Next slide. And then I think that's not more.
I can take it from there. Yeah. Thank you, Hannah. My name is Julian Katz. I'm a co-founder of Green the Bid. My background is in advertising agency production. but I've spent the last 4 years on the brand side at Meta and Airbnb, and I'm about to start a new gig at another tech company. So I can tell you from that experience the importance of data to brands. So again, a lot of what Hannah was talking about was more kind of when you do it yourself, or you have a smaller non-union shoot or a small photography shoot. But what we do advocate for at Green the Bid is that we recognize that there is a cost to doing this really thoroughly and properly. And we believe that only the brands should shoulder that cost, because they're shouldering all the rest of the costs for all the other departments. You know, we're getting together at the brand's behest to do this undertaking in the first place. They're responsible just the same way they would be for any safety or catering or any other consideration on set. But we also believe that if you're asking a brand to spend money on something that they're not used to spending money on, that one thing that you can give them back in return for that is data, and data is extraordinarily important to brands. If you think about it, almost every major brand, pretty much every major brand, has made a public pledge regarding their sustainability programs. You know, net zero goals. Again, we don't really believe that net zero should be the terminology that we use for this, because it's basically not possible to achieve. But at any rate, most companies have said by X date, by 2025, by 2030, we will be carbon neutral, you know, carbon positive, water positive, whatever. So if you're actually giving data back to the brands, they can use that data to help validate those you know, those claims and those pledges that they've made. And traditionally, historically, marketing has not really played a role in those sustainability efforts. It's been much more about the supply chain and the creation of products and the shipping, et cetera. So we can go to the next slide. We have put together this document, which gives, well, first of all, I have to say, we don't tell anyone in that ecosystem, brands, agencies, production, et cetera, we don't tell them that they owe this data back to the brand unless the brand is paying for it. If you choose to take this on yourself, if you choose to give this data back to them and make a report, that's keeping this top of mind. That's keeping sustainability as a consideration for all stakeholders involved, which is great for everyone. But you don't owe it to anyone unless they're paying for it, we believe. So if a brand is properly paying for it, we expect that you give them back at least this type of top line information. This is not a form that you need to fill out. This is not a template for you to follow, but this is the basic information that we expect any sustainability impact report, which is generally like 10 to 30 pages long. We expect you to have at least this baseline data. So you're breaking down the disposition of what would have been waste, and how much of that was diverted. So what was the weight and percentage of relative percentage of what went to landfill versus composting versus recycling. It's amazing when you start separating out the composting and the food waste, and what a large percentage of the overall waste profile of your production it is. It can be in the 60s or 70% of the waste by pounds. And when organic matter breaks down, when it's not composted, when it just goes to landfill, it actually releases methane, which in the near term is some 30 times more harmful to the environment than carbon as a greenhouse gas. So it's really actually incredibly important to donate all the food that that you can, and to compost what's left over. And you'll be amazed how much composting there is. Recycling, always important. That should not be new information to anyone. Hopefully, pretty much everyone in the country is doing that at this point. But also then, detail that those hydration stations. What was your approach? Was it coolers with refillable bottles? Did you supply refillable bottles to crew, or did they bring their own? Did you have to bring in some single use? Were you able to bring in aluminum? How many plastic bottles would you have? Basically, did you avoid using because of that tactic? Art department, where did all those materials come from? Where did they go? Were you purchasing all net new materials, or were you able to upcycle some previously used materials? Was that able to be donated to, the leftover was able to be further upcycled or not, and how. E-waste drive, if you did that. Carbon consumption, we don't, the expectation we set with brands and agencies is you're not going to get a robust, detailed carbon report based on the 1% of production budget to do the sustainability properly. That's an additional kind of accounting task to fill out one of these detailed, complex carbon calculators. But at the very least, you can get the key, chunks of that, which is really transportation. It's the air travel, especially how many flights and what distance and what class. And if you have that information, you can give, a chunky number that is at least as a guide, is something that the brand can use to do any kind of offsetting that they would like to do. And donations, everything everywhere went. Michael's got this amazing example. I don't know if everyone properly introduced themselves, but Michael has a sustainability consultancy, and he's got this amazing, inspiring example of these big set pieces that were turned into playground slides that would have been incredibly expensive and time consuming and wasteful to cut up and bring to landfill. And so anything you're able to do, that's an amazing example, but anything you're able to do to donate to local schools, to charities, to theater companies, whether that's food or wardrobe or set pieces or construction materials, that storytelling can be really inspiring and get everyone to keep this, again, top of mind and to be excited to continue this work on future productions. But you also really want to, speaking of storytelling, you also want to talk about any areas that, walls that you hit, any problems that you faced, unexpected circumstances that might have, compromised your efforts to have the most sustainable regenerative production possible. Because if you, surface those then and discuss them as a group, you can, strategize on ways to get around those type of issues in the future. So that's the reporting piece. And we're here if you have any questions about that. And also, if you wanted to talk to any of the consultancies, they can provide you some examples of what their reports look like. So we're nonprofit. We just, our group of co-founders has put together a whole bunch of resources for the entire community to use free of charge. If you go to the bottom of our website, which is greenthebid.earth, you'll find some basic set of resources. You'll find a list of the vetted consultants. Basically, any consultant that we feature on our site is someone that can uphold all of the standards of that we outline in a deck like this. So they're going to do the reporting. They're going to look at it holistically, not only in terms of like sorting garbage, but also talking to each department head and going in with a reduction mindset to start with, and strategizing on ways to upcycle materials, et cetera. And we have consultants now really all over the world. It started with I think 5 North American consultancies, but now that list has grown to include consultancies in Europe and South Africa and many other markets. So hopefully that will be a great resource for you. And please check back if you're putting together a shoot in a different country, because we're constantly vetting and adding new consultancies to that list. Training and education, we have some general education and some links to some amazing resources in there, but also we have training modules. We've done a robust webinars and recorded that for agency communities, for production communities. And those are slightly different because they have different considerations. That the role of the producer is a little bit different if you're a line producer on the production side versus an agency producer. We have checklists for all the different crew departments, et cetera. But then also, next slide, please. We have a much deeper dive of resources that's specific to each category. So we have different resources for brands and agencies than we do for production. For production, we have language that you can use in your bid letter, language you can use in your call sheets, some again, hopefully COVID is something we don't have to keep talking about, but we do have a sustainable rider to the AICP's COVID production guidelines. Just, basically like everything you need. There's a complete guide to sustainable production, which will help you if you're doing this yourself, if you choose to or have to do this yourself without the help of a consultancy. It's really just a step-by-step guide for how to do the best job you possibly can and educate yourself on how to do that the way that Hannah has been educating her teams, and they can do it all without the help of a consultancy. So we've put together all these resources. A lot of them were at the request of members, sometimes in meetings like this. If you are looking for something in particular, you can reach out to us at hello@greenthebid.earth. We can either point you in the right direction, or if it's a resource that we actually have not yet put together, we can do that. We can do that with the help of you or some of our members, or just on our own. And we're happy to do that because it's just really for the benefit of the entire community. And I think a lot of our community finds that these resources are incredibly helpful. So hopefully you will too. So we have plenty of time for Q&As or for questions and answers. If anyone would like to, if anyone has any, I didn't notice if there had been any in the chat.
I just invited people to put some questions into the chat. I thought, maybe Hannah, you could talk a little bit because of your experience and also understanding this community, which I know is very diverse and it represents a lot of different stakeholders here. But, when you were thinking about, because you're very familiar with Green the Bid, did you feel like there was adaptation that you needed to make? What are some considerations that you feel like some of the people here might be thinking, okay, but I might be talking about something slightly smaller scale or a still job. So what are, I know you touched upon that a little bit, but what are some ways that you felt you've either had to modify or that you think are important things that people should consider as they read it?
So I think that when I was first starting, the way I really used the resources on Green the Bid's website is that I used it for inspiration to think about categories that could be more sustainable or regenerative. And maybe I didn't need, to worry about some of the larger scale things that are highlighted on the website, but it was the spark that I could fan to grow the flame. And so when I first came across the resource, I literally read every single line and downloaded every single page. I was so hungry for it. And I could say, okay, this I could see a way that I can adapt. This I'm going to save for later, and then maybe I'll be ready for it, or it doesn't make sense now. So I think using it as inspiration to build excitement and momentum and make that contagious throughout the entire production was really helpful for me.
Great. And I saw that there, thank you so much. I think it's just, because people, I think Julian also mentioned like some of this talking about what works, what doesn't, how you adapt. I know that we're currently collaborating with you on something that's really exciting that we're going to be putting together. That's going to be taking some of these considerations and putting them forth to the community at large. So I'm really, really excited and appreciative of your participation in that. It's how we build things with the people that are actually on the ground doing it. And speaking of people on the ground doing it, maybe Michael, you can answer Lizzie Goodman's question, who said, abroad, what are the capabilities in Canada and Mexico? And we do have a lot of partners that are working in Canada and Mexico. So maybe if you want to just do a shout out to some of those folks and also talk about your experience as well.
Exactly. Great question, Lizzie. And there are consultancies that are based in Canada. There's Green Spark is there, and Earth Angel just set up a hub there, and Good Planet has a hub there. And most of the North American consultancies have remote programs, so they can work anywhere. So even if you're working in the sticks and you don't want to fly a consultant in, obviously. So that would be counter to our reducing the carbon concept. But a lot of them can work remotely and support your productions. In Mexico, there are a few consultancies that we've just been made aware of, and we're adding to our list, as well as some service production companies such as The Lift that incorporate, just like Canada incorporates sustainability into their processes. So there's a lot of options.
Well, we're waiting to see if there's another question or two. I did want to mention too, I see somebody's putting something into the chat now. So I'll come back to what I was thinking about. What happens, Pat was asking, what happens if using best sustainable practices increases the bottom line? Would a cost consultant allow those line items to be suspended? I'm not saying this very elegantly. No worries, Pat, we get what you're saying, because cost consultancy, I mean, we do have cost consultants or production consultants that are Green the Bid members that are aware of some of these costs, but maybe Julian or Kat can speak to what happens in a situation when those costs, because we do say costs can flex depending on what the production looks like. So what's your experience been like? What are those conversations then like when you're finding that mid-stride or as it goes?
I mean, I think the goal is to just get the consultants or anyone that's involved with deciding whether or not you're moving forward with the sustainable production in the mix from the beginning and like on the team from the start, right? So I think if everybody has agreed that we're going to have a sustainable production for all the reasons that we already know, then understanding what the costs are and what the benefits to those costs are will go a long way with any consultant or anyone reviewing your bid, right? And then I think you'll have less fight with that understanding. I mean, I think we all managed to jump right back into production about 3 months after COVID hit. And in order to make that happen, we all had to agree that we were going to keep crews safe, and a pretty decent amount of money was added to every bid, rightfully so. And so I think if we think of sustainability as something that needs immediate attention and requires a specific team of people to manage it and measure it and make sure it happens properly, then I think a small amount of cost should be acceptable. I mean, it's really reasonable costs. So we're not talking about gigantic costs that are hopefully going to determine whether you do or don't do a job. So I think hopefully that answers the question. It's just getting everybody on board from the beginning as an advocate, like I spoke about when I went through my part, and then just assuring them that what they're doing is going towards what needs to be done, and it's not an extraneous cost or fluff. It really is just what it takes to make it happen.
Yeah, and I've put in the chat, we have resources actually for procurement for that reason, because, I think that with anything in the world probably, but also specifically with production, I think, mysterious is the part that makes people feel very uneasy. And what we found is that procurement really wanted to support, but they wanted to understand what would this potentially look like. So we did actually create some resources so that he could understand what a timeline looks like, what some of the costs might look like, so that they could reasonably kind of anticipate what they might be seeing, and also why we do a lot of this education about where things can be found in the budget, et cetera. So, and we encourage people to also talk a little bit more specifically if there are those questions about what are these budgetary considerations and practices. But I know that Hannah, you had something you might be able to add to that conversation. So please jump in.
Yeah, I think, and I'm speaking maybe more specifically to the producers in the virtual room here. So much of our job is about education. If I think about when adding payroll to non-union shoots, we had so much pushback, and we constantly had to educate about why this was actually the proper and legal and appropriate way to pay crew. And now it never gets flagged. In fact, it would probably be flagged if it wasn't there. So I think if we attack this problem with the same mentality of education and investing in helping people understand why it's important, and it's also, I mean, it's such a small percentage. It's I think if you can explain the why behind it, any cost consultant would put it through.
I also loved when you were talking about the way that you're languaging things. And I think we advocate for this as well, that you're saying, this is the reason why we're doing X, and really asking people almost to opt out or to voice objections if they have it. I mean, it makes it a little stickier, right? People have to dig in. And I think it's okay to have uncomfortable conversations, but it does say, please raise this as an issue, rather than, is this okay that we're doing XYZ and having a big, protracted conversation. Instead, you're sort of getting ahead of this by saying, this is what we see as best practice. This is why. And then, but also leaving that sort of door open for questions if people have it. So I think it's both a gentle but firm, I guess if those two things are possible in one, I don't know, a way of approaching it, right? Which is, we are in this together. This is why we're doing it. And these are the processes that we have in place.
Yeah, I never want to have to ask permission to be sustainable. And so I am going to say, this is what we're doing. And then if you want something over and above that, we can also add in a consultant or some reporting, but I'm not going to ask for permission. And we have a delicate dance as producers where it's not my shoot. It is the client's shoot. It's your money. I'm here to steward that. But I'm also not going to put my time into a project where I can't also be sustainable.
Excellent. Yeah, and I just wanted to, the thing I was going to mention, which is really a detail point, but I wanted to let people know, if you haven't had the chance to go on, now that I've put a million links in the chat, look at the resources, but also know that if you want to join us, we are a donation-based organization because we are a nonprofit, but you can join for free. You just go and make that commitment for your particular group, or if you're an individual, you can see that there's room for that too, and that we welcome that. We also invite people to email us at hello@greenthebid.earth. I think that email address was mentioned earlier, with questions, because anytime we have a question, we know there are probably 100 or 500 people or more asking the same question. And it is often the catalyst for material that we will develop next with amazing people like Hannah as our key experts. So it's not that we are all individual experts. I mean, we've gotten to know this very well, but sometimes it's about also reaching out to somebody who has had a very specific and personal real world experience and saying, how can we work together to have a best understanding about what something looks like in your locality, or what ways that you overcame XYZ challenge. So I think even Julian mentioned that transparency of process is so important to everything we do, even when things go a little bit messy and wrong, which they always do a little bit in the world and in production. So we really invite that conversation because it's also helpful to us. So we hope that you will reach out, and that if you want to join us, you'll come be a part of this experience. And we really appreciate the time. And I know Kat's raising her hand to me. So Kat, please begin.
About what Hannah just said, like Hannah had a great like answer to that last question, is that she said she was as a good steward of the brands and clients' money, she's just automatically going to make sure that the production is sustainable, and anything that anybody wants above and beyond what she would normally do, she's happy to also add to it. Because I think all brands, from the smallest to the largest, everybody has announced a measure of sustainability within their company. They're getting to such and such by such and such date. I don't know any brands, again, no matter how small or large, that haven't actually put something out there. And so a lot of times that really concentrates itself in a brand supply chain. But what we can do as part of that, like, scope 3 emission, technically a partner, what we can do is say, hey, listen, I know that your company has a mission, and so I'm protecting this mission. This is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to make that, contribute to that mission. This is what I'm going to do. And so I really applaud you, Hannah, and I love that comment.
I also wanted to just jump in quick and say, I know there was a lot of reference to these being written into the AICP contracts. We also are going to be updating our universal bid form to add sustainability into the line items in the coming weeks. And we will announce those changes in a newsletter to anyone who's subscribed to our newsletter and our members and partners. So that will also be something that we're doing on our end.
Yeah, and Hannah's going to help, and we've got some great language already from the Green the Bit site. And if anyone has some great examples on their current estimates, please don't be shy, send them in, because strength in numbers. And I think, this has been so great because it gives me the confidence to talk to my clients in it, and perhaps, think that I can educate them on some of the things that we can do that start at the small and go, can scale up depending on the production without really impacting the bottom line.
Great. I really wanted to iterate again. Thank you so much for inviting us to spend time with all of you today. We really appreciate the alliance with the AMA and all of that you're doing. We've had some wonderful conversations leading up to this day and many more to come.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. You make me want to be a better agent when it comes to sustainability. So thank you.
Of course. Thank you guys.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for joining in the fun.